The IPL auction is a bit of a random event because of the nature of an auction over a draft. And you add the mega auction part to it and the two new teams, and there's a lot going on here that quite often just doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And I was hoping to go into batting and bowling and wicket keeping and all these different things. But unfortunately, my boys have had COVID, the same boys that you see on the start of the video. They're fine, don't worry about them. They're just playing Switch and watching cartoons. But it meant I haven't been able to do as much as I wanted. But I have done a pretty thorough breakdown of all the bowlers who've been in the IPL so far. I really want to put them in different kind of groups because quite often we just have spin and seam and these sorts of things. But that's not really what you're looking at when you're trying to get a team for an auction like this, right? And I didn't want to look at SMAT or under 19 or even the overseas players who haven't played before. I wanted to look at a tangible thing of what people had done in the IPL so far and therefore what they might be able to do going forward. So basically what I'm doing is ranking all the free agents. Actually just ranking everyone because also some of the players who've been retained are also in there as well. But what was really important to me was that I wasn't just going to be ranking them on their play alone. I think that local players are often undervalued in auctions. Rashnoi went for 4 crore when he was retained recently. And he might well be the third most sought out leg spinning talent. 4 crore is not that much for leg spin in the IPL. And there are 7 local players for every overseas player, right? So on my board, I've factored that in. Also think that age is something that's not talked about enough. Like if you go out of your way to draft the next big 20-year-old or a bunch of younger players, maybe at even 18 and 19-year-olds, they're going to take time to develop. And they'll be 22, 23, 24 by the time they do. And that's when the next mega auction is. And then you have to make a decision whether you want to keep them. Same for an older player. If you're drafting someone now who's 32, they're going to be 36 at the end of this cycle. So I tried to think about that. And also I wanted to factor in players with great all-round skills, great fielding, flexibility when looking at the ranking. And what I've done is put each player in a specific group. Quite often players should be in more than one group anyway, but I've tried to make it really, really clear here because I want to judge them against other players of their type and also for the reasons I think they're most likely to get paid. So with all that in mind, the number 1 player on any one of these lists may not be the best player. They may just be the ideal player because of a bunch of other things.
This is the last knock. My dad told me to say this.
And so let's start with left arm seam because this is T20 cricket and we almost always should start with left arm seam. I'm very underwhelmed with the crop here. I have little faith in my top selection. And it's possible that my number 3 will actually have the best year. And my number 7 could end up being massively overpaid, but still being worth it. So let me show you how I came to all this. Natarajan is 30, which is slightly too old for my timeline, but he's actually not played that much cricket, so I figure he hasn't had as many, days running through the crease. So with that in mind, I'm assuming that at 34, he probably hasn't lost that much pace. But he also was injured last year, which is even more of a concern. But he's an Indian bowler, and he's certainly got more skill than any of the other locals in his position. And when he was fit, he had a really good year. He does struggle to strike early in the game, but he goes at less than 7 runs and over from over 0 to 14. I wish he would strike more, and I worry about him at the death, but he can play. I have Trent Boult behind him because he's been the best left-arm pace bowler in the IPL over the last few years, and I don't see that massively changing. I have Trent Boult next because he's been the best left-arm pacer in the IPL over the last few years. Now, it does help bowling with Jasprit Bumrah, and he's 32. And I have Mustafiza behind him, and he had a great 2021. If he continues like that, he might actually be worth more than Trent Boult. But Trent Boult is a great power play bowler. And that specifically is why I've got him up the list, because I rate them higher than death bowlers. And as far as Mustafiza goes, he's 26, but I do worry about his shoulder, which is far older than 26. I expect him probably to go for more money than Boult, but in all truth, it probably just depends on what you're looking for. If you want a left-arm seamer who's better in the power play, you go with Boult, and if you want one who's better at the death, you go with Mustafiza. They're both really good options. After this, we get a hat trick of younger Indian talent, and I'm not really confident in any of these 3. And if I could manage it as a franchise, I try and buy the cheapest option here and hope that it works. I've gone with Arshdeep first, and the reason is because he took so many wickets in the power play last year, and I value that very high. But I wouldn't be surprised if he had a down year this season. And partly I base that on the fact that he had quite a high economy and a low average. Generally, when that happens, that means that people are really attacking you to go out. They're probably going to pull back slightly, and then you won't get as many wickets, and maybe they'll work out how to, just handle you. Sakaria has a very good economy in the power play, but he did struggle to take wickets there. I think people got very excited about him and then were a little bit more muted. It'll be interesting to see how this auction sort of goes with that. Khalil Ahmed has great numbers, but really struggled last year. he should be a top option in the power play. So there you have sort of three guys with weaknesses who I'm not that sure of, but because of their age and the period that they're coming to, and the fact that there aren't that many left-arm Indian seamers out there, I expect all of them to do quite well. Next we have Sheldon Cottrell, who we know can take early wickets, but also go for runs, kind of like a more modern-day Mitchell McClenaghan. And just in front of him I have Marco Janssen, who probably hasn't bowled enough for us in T20 cricket to really get a good idea of yet, but he's tall as hell and left arm, so, you know, he's going to be someone that people like. I have Unakut here as well, and we know that he can only bowl in the power, but he's really tested there, and he doesn't go for many runs. You would expect more wickets from him, but the problem here is he's just comically bad after the power play. 10 and over in the middle, and 13 runs and over at the death. But if you want a power play specialist, he might be a decent, cheap option. But he's on this list really because there just aren't that many left-arm seamers out there, which is not helped by the fact that Sam Curran and Mitchell Starc pulled out of the auction. I've also thrown in George Garton and Daniel Sams because they offer left-arm seam and some hitting. In Sams' case, I've never been a huge fan of his bowling, and his hitting is not that consistent. And I think Garton is actually still in development. But they are left-armers, they have been in the IPL before, and you probably assume that they'll get on a squad somewhere. I hate to say it, but off-spin is also not specialist as I was hoping for. Actually, I really struggled here. My number 1 and 2 off-spinners are actually all-rounders. And neither of them would be this high if they couldn't bat. Moeen is obviously already with Chennai, so that leaves us with Washington Sundar. Now, it might shock people that he's this high up in the order, being that Bangalore didn't even seem to want to play him. But that's only because I think Bangalore made a huge error. And I should say, from a personal standpoint, I don't think there are many people in the world higher on Washington Sundar than I am. But when you look at his numbers, you just find it hard not to have him this high anyway. He has a better economy than Ashwin at the same average, and his batting is more important in T20. And he's still only 22, which is a good age, but not a perfect age. But he's really experienced for someone of that age. And it's funny to think that Bangalore had Washington Sundar and Moeen Ali on their roster, and they misused both of them. What happened when Moeen Ali left? I'm not saying that Washington's going to have that kind of an impact, but when you look at the overall off-spinners out there, he certainly should be very high up on everyone's board. Ashwin is 35, but he's still Ashwin, and we're not really worried about him losing his athletic nature because he's not that athletic a player anyway. It's more whether his fingers can continue to do what his fingers do. And I don't think he's a fantastic T20 cricketer, but he's still the king of off-spin in T20 and everywhere else. He's local, he brings leadership, and he can bat, and it's probably better suited for a wicket where it's ragging and can knock the ball around a little bit, but you do have the option occasionally of putting him up the order. Sunil Narayan is next, and he's also already been retained, and that's because you can't really replace him. So I can understand why KKR were so happy to keep him around, even if that might not make sense to everyone. He's obviously not the player he once was, but his ability to bowl defensively and also occasionally hit, you can't replicate that. Now, if you thought Washington was a bit of a pick, wait until I go rogue here and go with Lalit Yadav. And it's okay if you don't know who that is, because it's not exactly a big name, and, I've got him quite high up on this list. He's 25, and so he hits our age range perfectly. He played for Delhi last year, and I thought he bowled really well, but they just kept leaving him out. I just don't think he quite fit into their plans. But also thought it was a bit odd, because I thought that some of the surfaces they were playing on, he was just a really good player. But remember, Delhi had like 1 million bowlers, and they probably just didn't feel like they needed him. The other problem they had with him is that they would have seen him as an all-rounder, which I think is very fair. That's one of the reasons he's higher up on my list. He averages over 40 in first-class cricket and one-day domestic cricket, and his strike rate in 7 IPL games is less than a run a ball. So they probably felt a little bit let down by that. If you look at his other domestic T20 stats, though, he averages 37 while striking at 154. And you combine this with his bowling against left-handers, and I just think he's a really, really strong off-spinning option. And I also wonder how cheap he might be, because he didn't play many games last year, and he didn't hit the ball off the surface. Giant Yadav is next, and I'm pretty confused about this, because Mumbai have been using him as a left-handed specialist, but he's not really bowled that well against left-handers. In fact, he's actually more economical against right-handers. He's 32, can bat, but he's been sitting on the bench for years. But in truth, he's still one of the better options when you look at all the names here, which does tell you a lot. Next is the 2 Afghanistani spinners, Mohammad Nabi and Mujib. I think Nabi at a cheap price is still worth having. His numbers are fine. He's above average in wickets and economy. And his batting has slipped, but as long as you know that going in, you're not going to pay for it. And he is older than Sand, but he can still bowl off-spin. Mujib's not obviously technically an off-spinner, but I put him here because he's more like an off-spinner than a leg spinner. And I do feel that teams are a little bit wary of him now. But with the expanded team setup, I thought he might slip in as a backup spinner somewhere. And we finish up with 2 very frustrating local players. Huda, who I suppose qualifies now as a bowling all-rounder, maybe just because he struggled so much with the bat. His bowling just was not particularly great last year. And with the bat, he averaged 16 despite making 64 in one knock. He's good enough to play for India at the moment, and he's a really good age, but he's played 7 IPL seasons. And last year he averaged 16 with the bat and bowled 16 overs in 12 games. I don't even know what to do with him, so he's on this list. K. Gautam can bat and bowl, and as a batter, he's probably more of a hitter, and as a bowler, he's been absolutely terrible. He didn't actually play a game last season. But he is actually an off-spinner, and he's available. And again, with the expanded squads being available, I wonder if he might get one more go. There's clearly talent with him and Huda. It's just whether either of them can make it right. Obviously, Huda makes a lot more sense. He's just played for India. His first-class numbers look fine and everything else. But perhaps you could get Gautam as a very cheap backup. All right, leg spin. So you can see him already smiling just because leg spin's better. And also, there's a bit more quality here. I've got Rashid Khan at the top. His batting and economy push him ahead of Chahal. But I also went with Chahal very high. And I think he could go for a fortune here. Actually, let me rephrase that. I think he should go for a fortune here. I think in general, Indian spinners are underpaid because there's this feeling that, oh, it's an Indian spinner and we'll find somewhere else. As you just saw from my off-spin list, there aren't that many out there. And Chahal is clearly the best leg spinner in India at the moment. There is a clear distance from him to the next best. And in fact, the next best leg spinner isn't really a leg spinner at all, is it? It's Varun Chakravarti, who's not a leggy, but leggy-like. He's already on board with the KKR when they've retained him. And he signed for 8 crore. It'd be really interesting to see if Chahal goes for a lot more than that. I assume he will. And next on the list is Ravi Bishnoi, who went for 4 crore. I really struggle to think that he wouldn't have gone for more than that in the auction, especially once, considering his age and the way he bowled last season, is he not worth at least as much as Chakravarti? I suppose he's more untested, but he's also younger and better in the field. I rank Chakravarti and Bishnoi really close to each other. And then it's Chahar, who is almost dead on average for leg spinners in the IPL, 7.4 runs an over and 26 runs per wicket. He's 22, but he's a lot more tested than someone like Bishnoi, but I just don't know if he has the ceiling of a player like Bishnoi. The good news for Chahar is that Bishnoi is not in the auction, so he might end up with some of the money that really should have gone to Bishnoi. A friend was telling me that in some mock drafts that he saw, Chahar and Hasaranga all went for about 9.5 crore. I see them in 3 different tiers, really. I think that Chahal is at the top, Chahar is next, and Hasaranga is behind him. Hasaranga might be a better bowler than Chahar, but he's not Indian, and we don't actually know what he's going to do in the IPL. He played a couple of games and went for runs, but probably not enough for us to get a really good idea of it. But then he went to the World Cup and bowled brilliantly again. He's obviously got hitting as well. There's a lot of talent there. I'd be surprised if he doesn't go for a decent amount, but I personally think that he'll work out IPL cricket. The important thing is how much the team's willing to pay to work that out. In my mind, I've sort of grouped the 3 local players next. Tawada is famous for batting because of the innings. But to be honest, the more I look at him, I don't really like his batting or his bowling. But as a package and a 28-year-old, perhaps this will just be his best period ever. I am not convinced. He batted with an average of 15 and a strike rate of 105 last year, and he bowled at an average of 42 and went at 9 runs and over. Gopal took a lot of wickets in 2020, and then the next year he took very few and got some treatment. Last year he bowled 7 overs in 3 matches. He's a career 12 average, 105 hitter, despite obvious batting talent. I don't really know how to rank him either. And the third one is Ashwin, who is a pretty frugal leggy over a couple of years, and then last season just played 3 times and got smashed. Because he can't bat, he's further down the list than the other 2, but he might actually be the best leg spinner here because he had the ability to keep it tight for 3 seasons. And at 31, he should be kind of near his prime as a leg spinner as well, so I'm not too worried about him being slightly older. And in the next tier, we've got a couple of overseas old fellas and then Adam Zampa. There's plenty of experience here. You're only getting bowling with this lot, but it is better bowling than most on this list. But the problem with these guys at the moment is that Mishra and Tahir are very old and Zampa seems a little bit out of fashion. But I honestly think that having any of these on your bench as a backup leg spinner, if you have spot available, is a very good idea. Out of these 3, Mishra would definitely be my first choice, just because he's Indian. We know how good a bowler he is. Even if you just get a couple of seasons of him playing maybe 3 or 4 games a year when the pitches are in favour, he's going to do really well for you. And you're probably not going to have to pay that much money for him, and he's not taking up an overseas spot. Let's have a look at the left-arm orthodox, shall we? Ravi Jadeja is the obvious number 1 here. It doesn't even need to really be discussed that much. I would say that Akshar Patel is probably a slightly better T20 bowler than him, but Akshar isn't one of the best death hitters in the league. So I've gone Jadeja 1 and Akshar 2nd, but they're both already taken. Now I found it really weird to work out who I go with next, because this list is actually quite interesting. There's some young talent there, there's some untested talent there, and then you've got Krunal Pandya, who should go next. But he had an absolutely shocking year last year. And he's really been struggling for quite some time now. However, I still like him as an opening bowler. But outside of that, I don't know if his bowling stands up as much as it used to. His last top year in the IPL was in 2018. And he's had one very good batting year since then. And yes, he can be frugal, but he is allergic to wickets. I think there's more talent in the left arm finger spinners than there is in the off spinners, but it's messier. Like for instance, I've put Harpreet Baer next, and he's had a great 7 games and is at a good age, but that's all he really is to me, 7 games and good age. There is a little bit of batting with him as well, but not much. And I would probably link him with Shahbaz Ahmed as well, who has outstanding figures, taking wickets at 13 last year and going at 6.5 and over. But if you think that Harpreet is untested, well, Shahbaz only bowled 14 overs in 11 matches, which is bizarre. And he didn't bowl in like half of his games. If you look at the numbers, he bowled brilliantly to left-handers, but from like 15 balls. And his SMAT numbers do suggest that he's a quality player, but how will he go game after game? And we just don't know until after that happens. It'll be really interesting to see the prices of those 3 players. Krunal Pandya has the reputation, but not really the numbers. The other 2 have the numbers, but not really any games. I actually like all 3 of these players, but I couldn't tell you who's going to be the best in 2022. Certainly, I would have even more trouble telling you who's going to be the best in 2025. So just to make it a little bit easier on myself, I've gone Shakib Al Hasan next. You can add him to the list of older spinners that you can leave on the bench with Imran Tahir, Mishra, Muhammad Nabi, those sorts of guys. I don't think he bowled particularly well last year, and his batting was non-existent. But for a bench option, with his experience and his skill set, I still think he's really, really handy. You've essentially got a backup batter and a backup bowler if everything falls apart, which I suppose is what happened to Kolkata at times last season. And you can add Mitch Santner to that. I think right at the moment, he's probably a better bowling option than Shakib and probably a better fielder than Shakib as well. But he hasn't bowled that much, and his batting is probably handy rather than being anything near top order. You're probably never going to bat him higher than 5 or 6. But again, I'd have those 2 in a similar tier. Abhishek Sharma bowls an over a game, and he's okay at hitting, striking at 130. But 1 over a game, and you'd want to be better than 16 runs per match with the bat if you're an all-rounder, right? And my guess is that his decent bowling numbers are from him only bowling when everything is in his favour. I was really confused looking at his record at how I feel about him as a player. Shahbaz Nadeem had his last good year in 2017, and he's been horrid since. He's a bench backup for matchups only, I would say now. Alright, let's look at left arm wrist spin, because there's 2 of them. Tareq Shamsi bowled 24 balls last season. He struggled in those 24 balls, but you know, it's hard to take that much from it. If you are desperate for a left arm spinner, he is by far and away the best left arm wrist spinner in the world, but he's not exactly a secret, is he? And there are less left-handers in India than there are in other countries. I still would actually like to see what he does in a full season, but I don't know if I'd take a shot at him if I was a general manager at the moment. But with an expanded league, he may actually get that shot. Kuldeep Yadav has taken 5 wickets in his last 14 games in the IPL, and in 2018 he took 17 in a season. Everyone's going to go on about how this is a confidence thing and how he was badly treated. I really think this is a technical thing as much as anything. This happens to a lot of left-arm wrist spinners. They're not that technically sound, and once you get used to facing them, it's easier to face them. I think he's just been unlocked a little bit. Not to say that he still couldn't be, a little bit handy at times. So that's our minority bowlers, if you will. And now for right-arm seamers, I think it's just better to split them by where they will be most used, because there's a lot of them, like 50% of bowling, right? So it's hard. So let's start with the power play seamers. And Avesh Khan is my number 1. I thought he was outstanding last year. And in the power play, he's averaged 27 while going at less than 7 runs and over. The fact he's a local and 25 and he's a plus bowler in all 3 parts of the game means that he's about to get incredibly rich, right? Jofra was a late entry to the auction, and he's the best power play bowler in T20 cricket. He's going at less than 5 runs and over. You heard that correct. While averaging 14. Also, you heard that correct. Those numbers are comically low, and he should never be able to keep it up like that. But he has bowled 250 balls in the power play. So that economy and averages, they're not accidents. My only problem with him is that spending a fortune on him in this particular auction, and he's not going to play. And then if he continues to play Test cricket, I think he's going to open himself up to more injuries, and he may not always be fully available as well. But he's Jofra Archer, so teams will probably pay a fortune for him. I think it surprised some people that Delhi kept Nokia and not Rabada last season. But Nokia has a killer average at the top. And when I was ranking players on this list, that's what I looked at first. And I certainly would have retained him over Rabada. And I think Rabada's obviously great. But Rabada takes all these wickets at the end, and I want early wickets. And the players who deliver that are worth a lot. Also, last season, Nokia developed a new slower ball. He was already this fast bowling golem, and now he's become sentient. Shivam Mave is probably going to be a surprise to some people to be on this list, and certainly up this high. And he just hasn't bowled that much at the moment, so this is a little bit of a risk. He might even end up being a decent middle overs bowler or a death bowler as well. But I think this is where he's going to end up giving the most value, and he's also about to hit 23. And one thing I really liked about him compared to other local seam bowlers is that he's very economical as well. Shardul Thakur is next, and he goes at over 9 runs and over in the power play. So I understand, but he also takes his wicket an average of 31. The overall average in the power play is 38. And when you factor in his hitting ability, I think he just goes up the list above other safer options. He can take wickets and he can whack a couple of balls at the end. I don't think he's ever going to be a great hitter, and Chennai never really felt that way about him, but he's a handy hitter. And if you know going in that he's going to have a high economy, you can actually match him up with other bowlers who are going to have lower economies, which I think makes him even more dangerous. I think if you do that, he can probably deliver you 2 overs in the power play, which means he's a very good chance of getting a wicket for you. Bhuvi comes in next, and it actually hurts me to have him on the list behind Shardul Thakur. I'd love to have him higher, but he just doesn't take any wickets anymore. And this is the power play, right? His economy is 5.9, don't get me wrong, it's incredible over the last 3 years. And that's because teams have stopped playing any shots off him at all. But I need wickets in the power play. I'm not saying he's not really handy. And we just talked about Thakur, he'd be actually very handy to pair with him. But you need to be able to take wickets at the top. It's so important. Also, Bhuvi's a 32-year-old medium fast bowler. Any slippage in his pace, which he might have already had, and he's going to struggle. Talking about medium fast bowlers, Sandeep Sharma has 8 consecutive good seasons in the IPL before this, and I'm not ready to ship him off just yet. He still had an economy in last year's power play of 6.7, which reminds me a little bit of Bhuvi's number. I wonder if teams are just blocking him out a little bit more because he's such a good bowler there. Bowling him outside the power play is the biggest problem, but I love him at the top. I was surprised when going through the numbers at how few middle over seamers have sort of come about. I suppose in my mind, because of Pat Cummins and Hassan Ali and Liam Plunkett, that position has got a little bit bigger, but the IPL specifically doesn't seem to have that many. But there are a couple here that make sense for this role if it's something that you think your team needs. Harshal Patel, by most, was probably seen as a death specialist, but his real value for me last season was the fact that he took so many wickets in the middle overs, 13 of them. I don't think that he would take that many again, because I think a lot of those came from teams just trying to smash him everywhere because it was Harshal Patel. Surely this season they'll knock him around a lot more. But that could mean that he ends up with a very low economy rate. The fact that he can bowl at the death is very handy, plus he bats. Handy again. So it gets him top spot here, even if I expect some serious regression from him. Just because there's one thing that I really believe in his bowling. It's not that he'll have great record every year, it's that he puts a lot of revs on the ball. If he can do that again this year, he should still be consistently dangerous. And Mohammad Shami is probably a weird choice here because I don't think many people coming in were thinking about him as a middle over seamer, and I actually think he's underbowled in this position. He's overbowled in the power play, which I know is backwards and doesn't make any sense, but he just doesn't take any wickets when he's got the new ball in a T20 game. But he does take wickets in the middle overs, and he takes a lot of wickets in the death as well. But he's averaging 16 at the death and 17 in the middle overs. Just keep bowling him there. He's really good at that. You can match him up with an overseas bowler who loves playing in the power play. And honestly, if he was a couple of years younger, I'd probably still have him in the list above Harshal. The other real middle over specialist at the moment is Prashit Krishna, who will eventually be a new ball bowler, I'm pretty sure of that. But so far he's been exceptional in the middle, averaging 22. Also, when I've seen him bowl for India, I also think he's much better bowling in the middle than he ever is at top. So I really think for any team they should take him, make sure they structure a bit of a bowling attack around him that can handle bowling more at the death and more at the beginning, because he may not be able to do that, and then develop him and hope he becomes a new ball bowler in, 2 or 3 years' time. There just aren't that many talents like him out there. The rest of these guys are all-rounders. Obviously, Andre Russell, I know that Kolkata tried to make him into a death bowler last year, but I really like it when he bowls in the middle. I think he's fantastically well-suited to that. Then you've got Hardik Pandya, who doesn't bowl that much, so I almost didn't have him on this list anymore, but if he does bowl again, I really like him bowling in this period. I don't like him particularly bowling at the death or in the power play. And Vijay Shankar, who has surprisingly good record in the middle overs and probably should get more love for this. Now we've come on to the death, where Chris Morris's retirement puts a little bit of a hole in this because there really aren't that many death specialist bowlers for what is such an important position. Morris was going at a run less than the death rate, and he was also averaging 9 less per wicket there than on average. So, you know, he was pretty good over the last 3 years. Yet somehow, despite being that good, people still think he was overrated. But that's why bowling at the death sucks, right? You know, unless you have an economy of 7.8 over the last 3 years, like Jasprit Bumrah. I mean, that man is scary, but also already on someone else's list. But who to put next is trickier. The next best death bowler who isn't Morris is probably Dwayne Bravo. And he's actually had a outstanding last 3 years there, but he's also older than running water at this point. I just can't put him second. The person with the next best economy is Nathan Coulter-Nile. I'm just not ready to promote him that high. But his numbers are exceptional. The same with Jason Holder. But I'm going to go with Mohammad Siraj, who I hope in the next 4 years becomes more of a power play star. But at the moment, at the death, he's going at less than 9 runs and over, and that's outstanding. He's a good power play bowler, but he's just better at the end. And at his age, and the fact that he keeps improving so quickly almost every time you see him bowl, it suggests that he's just absolute top tier. And so I think he has to be the second on this list when you factor in everything about him. You might have noticed that I've talked about a lot of death bowlers so far, and Rabada hasn't even been mentioned, and that's because his economy is 9.46, which is, you know, highish. But he does have 49 death wickets in 3 seasons. I just want him to take more wickets at the front of the game. If he took more wickets at the front, I don't care about all the wickets at the death. If he could get his economy at the death down a little bit, not take as many wickets, but somehow take more wickets at the front and maybe even in the middle, he would be a far more efficient bowler. And it's weird to say that about one of the great test bowlers of all time already. And not only that, one of the great test wicket takers of all time. But he just needs to take more wickets earlier in the game. And he does need to lower that economy a little bit at the death. Taking wickets is great, but, you know, 9.46, not as ideal. For the next spot, I got a little bit confused because Jason Holder can bat and Nathan Coulter-Nile can hit. And Nathan Coulter-Nile has been a good death bowler for some time, and Holder has been going at over 10 runs and over while taking his wickets at an average of 12 in the death over the last 3 years. Not just IPL, but all cricket. But I really do prefer economy at this end. But taking your wickets at 12, or 9 as he did in the IPL last year, is just wild. He just seems to understand how to dismiss people at the end, but he does travel a lot. But because of the different positions that Jason Holder can bat in, pretty much everywhere from 4 to 8, I think his batting is just worth so much more. And if you're taking your wickets at 12, I'm going to have to forgive the high economy because that's bizarre. And after them is Dwayne Bravo. His batting obviously isn't what it once was. Chennai used him in and out of the lineup last year, and he's 38. I mean, based on how he's bowled in the last couple of years, you'd think you get a couple more years out of Bravo. But he's obviously not the player he once was. I think you just have to factor that in, don't you? Siddharth Kaul had a good year last season, but he only played 8 matches. But if you look at his whole career, he's under 9 runs and over at the death. His power play bowling is good too, but I think this is where he should be at his best. His age and the fact that he hasn't been used much does worry me a little bit, but as a local death bowling option that will probably be cheap, I really like it. That's kind of all the right arm seamers. I know I'm missing a couple like Tyagi and Hazelwood, but I've really looked for specific roles. And that's what I really want to do is match players up against other players who do a very similar thing to them. So, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of bowlers for you before the IPL draft. And if I get any chance, I'll have a look at the batters and, I don't know, maybe even the wicket keepers.